What makes a company go from being good to excellent? Jim Collins and his team analyzed for 5 years the companies that had outperformed the market by a multiple of 3, and bought them compared to another company in their sector with the same opportunities and resources. The premise was that they had to be companies that had had normal results for 15 years and after some changes had achieved 15 years of extraordinary results in the stock market. They chose publicly traded companies because the data was much easier to extract and analyze. Now, we will look at 7 of the concepts extracted from Jim Collins' masterpiece in the business world, From Good to Great. Now let's go for these 7 concepts that made companies extraordinary. But before we start with these concepts, let me tell you a couple of things that surprised me before we began. First, none of these companies achieved excellence through acquisitions or mergers. That is, combining 2 mediocre or normal companies never made an excellent company. Second, none of them had an extraordinary economic incentive plan for their executives, at least nothing different from what other companies in their sector had. Sometimes we think that a correct incentive will be the solution to the growth we are not having, but according to the book, that is not the case. Now, let's get to it. Concept number 1, these companies had level 5 leaders who were extraordinary leaders who went beyond the norm, but surprisingly not in the way you might think. They were not celebrities or had an inflated ego. These leaders think first about the success of their organization and then about their personal wealth. The company always comes first, and interestingly, these leaders. They earned less than the leaders of the companies they compared themselves to, who didn't have excellent results. These leaders were usually shy, but showed extreme ferocity to do a good job. They were people who thought about the future of their company even when they were not there, and clearly planned how the succession would be, that is, how their company would be when they left or retired. They were modest and rarely liked to talk about themselves. When asked about their success, they said they had been very lucky to have their employees, and did not point to themselves as the heroes of the movie. On the other hand, there were other companies that were basically a genius with many assistants. This works as long as the leader is in the company. But when that leader leaves, the company is no longer excellent. In times of failure, they took responsibility. This was exactly the opposite in the case of the leaders of the failed companies. There is a very interesting concept in the book, which is the mirror and the window. Level 5 leaders looked out the window when there were successes, meaning they looked and said, "No, it was not thanks to me, but to the people working with me." And when there was a problem, they went to the mirror and said, "This was my fault." Interestingly, in these companies' reports to shareholders, the word "I" was used much less frequently by the leaders who had been excellent, and "we" was used instead. On the other hand, the other companies kept talking about "I have done this and I have thought this way." Therefore, we see an excessive ego in leaders who end up failing or have mediocre companies. The second concept is first who, then where. This is the concept of the bus. Before you see where the bus is going, you need to put the right people on that bus. That is, hiring efficiently and firing efficiently are key to making your company excellent. Here are some small tips for making better decisions about people. When in doubt, don't hire them. When you know you need to make a personnel change, do it. To do this, focus on these 2 concepts. If that person walked through the door again today, would you rehire them? And if that person suddenly said they were leaving the company, would you be happy? Now, on to the third concept, face the facts. According to the book, you need to have a culture of listening to everyone. To do this, lead with questions instead of answers and focus on constructive debate. For example, if a product launch goes wrong, don't blame individuals. This will make people afraid to admit their mistakes. Instead, create a culture where anyone can raise a red flag and express themselves freely without consequences. This will create an environment where leaders and managers always have information coming from the bottom up and can face facts and reality more effectively. The fourth concept is the hedgehog and the fox, which has to do with the different strategies used by the hedgehog and the fox. The fox is always thinking of new ways to attack the hedgehog in order to eat it. The hedgehog, on the other hand, has found its winning strategy and focuses on it. As a leader or manager, you need to know your company's winning strategy and focus on it instead of being distracted by new ideas or trends. When you do it, it must be completely effective, and it also explains how to reach this concept of the hedgehog. You have to find 3 things: what you can be the best in the world at, what you are passionate about as an organization, and what can give you an economic engine. And notice that it says what you can be the best in the world at, not what you are already the best in the world at. Many of the companies studied realized that what had brought them to where they were would not be their new hedgehog concept. For example, Walgreens was in the restaurant business, with many restaurants, but their new hedgehog concept, where they could be the best in the world, had to do with large pharmacies. Therefore, they decided to sell the entire restaurant division, even though it was profitable. This was a very brave decision that many entrepreneurs find difficult to make because those restaurants were not losing money, they were generating profits. But if their focus was on several things, they could not end up being the best in the new thing, because they would have to deal with the problems and opportunity costs of the restaurants. And there are more examples like this in the book of companies that have sold other business units, even if they were profitable, to focus on their new hedgehog concept. And from there, it is much easier to make decisions and even measure what is working and what is not. For example, for Walgreens, the Hedgehog concept of increasing the average spending of each customer who entered one of their large pharmacies was interesting. This made decision-making always effective, meaning that if this will increase the average spending of the customer in the pharmacy, then they will do it, and if not, they won't. Point number 5 is the discipline to not stray from the Hedgehog concept once you have found it, as the book says. You may take some time to find it, that's not a problem. But once you find it, don't leave it. Don't occasionally turn into a fox, and it takes a lot of discipline and focus to continue on that path. The 6th concept has to do with the flywheel and the doom loop. The flywheel is the wheel and gear that says that companies that have been excellent have never done one thing that has shot their business overnight, but it has been the repeated good decisions around their Hedgehog concept that have made it a flywheel that keeps going faster and keeps going up. On the other hand, the doom loop is the opposite of the Hedgehog concept, constantly getting distracted every year with new things, and each time the efforts don't go up, they go down, making the spiral reverse downwards. Finally, the 7th concept is that technology is not to be embraced as a creation but as an acceleration instrument. That is, don't look for new technologies to create new things, but use the technology that comes out to accelerate your flywheel, to make your Hedgehog concept more efficient. This has been Jim Collins' book. Leave a comment if you liked it. That's why we're making more, and if you want to stay up to date on the business world, subscribe to our YouTube channel for luck and lots of money in life. I also recommend that you watch more videos on my channel to keep learning.